Overall, what we're going to talk about today is really sad.
Yeah, it's a very tragic story.
It is. And I feel like it would almost be wrong for us to talk about anything else right now other than just start this one.
Yeah.
I mean, we do it all the time.
That is fair.
But there's something about this case that I think is just, it puts me in a really sad mood.
Yeah, me too. So shall we just jump into it?
Let's do it.
Alrighty. Well, everybody, I am Charlotte.
And I'm Dina. Welcome to the Grim Curriculum.
So over the last few years, we can say now, we've done various Christmas-related episodes. We've covered our top 5 Christmas monsters and villains, our grim Christmas traditions, and we've even covered the horrifying tale of the murder of the Lawson family, which occurred on Christmas Day in 1929.
This is another harrowing story that happened during what is supposed to be the happiest time of the year.
So some of you called it, but today we are starting our series on the still officially unsolved murder of JonBenét Ramsey.
What are your thoughts on this one?
It's a very sad one, like we just said. There is something about seeing this tiny, innocent, beautiful girl, and we do see her because of how much footage and how many photographs there are of her. And one of the things I was thinking about as researching, I was like, what would she be like today?
I know.
And I think the most tragic part of it all is like she was so young and it was just cut short. And I think she would have gone on to do wonderful things.
To me, you're so used to seeing the pictures of her in pageants.
Yes.
But it's the photos of her as just a normal kid that get to me, because it's just like you almost don't recognize her when you compare the photos.
No, I mean, in a sense, it's like seeing a supermodel in their sweatpants at home. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
The little videos you see where she's like, hey, mom, look at me. Look at me, you know, like, and you're like, oh, yeah, she was just a little kid.
This happened in 1996, which is actually the year that my family and I moved to Canada.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And it was all over the tabloids. And I remember being in the grocery store with my mom at the till and just seeing her face everywhere. And she was about the same age as I was.
Oh.
And I remember just, it stands out to me so much because, you know, I could read and you can see what those tabloids are with the pictures of her. And it was just shocking to me as a child to see something like that everywhere I went, because it was everywhere you went.
Absolutely. I don't remember. I was 3 years old and I was in the UK, and I just don't know if it didn't make it across the pond. I'm sure it did if you were watching the news. I'm sure it was talked about pretty globally after a certain point. But I didn't learn about it until I sort of found my interest in true crime. And of course, it's one of the big stories that is talked about, obviously, still to this day.
I think this case, every generation has that one unsolved story.
Yes.
And I think this is the one for our generation.
We always say every case is tragic and horrific, but it's always so much worse when it involves kids.
It's hard to talk about kids because, you know, we've covered a few stories regarding children, but it really adds another layer of tragedy when you're talking about someone so young. Like you said, someone whose life was really just cut short, especially someone like JonBenét, who you could argue she was in something that was so controversial, the child beauty pageants. It just adds that whole other layer of, this is someone who was not only victimized in a terrible way, but she really was out on display.
That's exactly how I would say she was displayed. And we'll get into it because there's a lot of different thoughts around the child beauty pageants.
Yes.
One in general, but two especially in this case. And I don't want to say too much before we've told any of the story.
I did a paper on child beauty pageants for a psychology class that I did. And so I researched, there's different levels of it. It's a very big world. But one thing that really shocked me is the criteria for how old you have to be to participate is they have to be old enough to sit up.
I thought you were going to say old enough to walk.
No. There are beauty pageants for babies.
You know what? That is true. The Gerber baby competition, right, comes to mind. And that's maybe a little different because you're just submitting a photo or whatever. And again, we'll get into it. To be a little kid who maybe enjoys that sort of thing, the performance and the dressing up of it all and whatnot, But as a baby, you have no clue what's happening.
No, absolutely not.
You're just giggling. You're just bright flashes and big smiles, and that's it. Before we go on, we do want to remind you that while there are many theories about who killed JonBenét, this story is still considered unsolved. Over the years, potential suspects have included everyone from members of the family, those in the community, and even Santa Claus. And as always, we will be exploring those theories in detail throughout this series with the utmost respect, of course, to the victim.
We're going to start with the question, who were the Ramseys?
So let's start with JonBenét's father. JonBenét Ramsey graduated from Michigan State University in 1966, earning himself a bachelor in electrical engineering. That year, he married his first wife, Lucinda. John would go on to join the Navy as a civil engineer, and he later earned his master's in business administration. Their marriage ended in divorce in 1978.
John and Lucinda had 3 children. Tragically, their oldest daughter, Elizabeth, would later pass away in a car accident.
So really, I mean, John was no stranger to a horrible tragedy in the family. Patsy Ramsey and John married in 1980 when she was 23 years old. She had already won various titles in the beauty pageant scene herself, including Miss West Virginia. She had a son from a previous relationship, and together they would have 2 children, Burke and JonBenét.
Burke was born on January 27, 1987. 2 years later, John formed the Advanced Product Group, which would later merge with 3 other companies to become Access Graphics. This would eventually be worth over $1 billion. And Access Graphics would later be bought out by the defense company Lockheed Martin.
Yeah, so John Ramsey was a pretty big wig in that sort of world, for sure.
Yeah, and the thing is that something that's going to come up a lot is this was a very, very, very high profile and wealthy family.
Yeah. JonBenét was born on August 6, 1990. Shortly after her birth, the family relocated to Boulder, Colorado. They moved into a 4-story home.
This was a massive house. There's tours of it available online. You can watch the videos. It's a very confusing layout. It's a really strange home, and that also kind of comes into play when it comes to all of this.
A lot of people, when talking about the home, say it is sort of deceiving from the outside. It's a big house for sure, but they say it's even bigger on the inside than it appears on the outside.
The 7,571 square foot red brick home had a separate kitchen for caterers, expensive antiques throughout, 5 bedrooms, 5.5 bathrooms, and a penthouse suite.
That is a huge house. Your average family home in Edmonton, just for example, you're talking usually 3 bedrooms, tops 3,000 square feet.
And that's a big house.
And that's considered a big house. Like, you're talking about $500,000 for that.
Yeah.
So this is like, what, 7,500 square feet? That is massive.
And it's interesting that you say that number because they bought it for around $500,000 back then.
Whoa. I mean, just goes to show how things have changed.
Yeah. It most recently sold for, I believe, $6.5 million.
Wow. I mean, Boulder, Colorado is probably a nice place to live.
Oh, it's beautiful.
I mean, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but from a very young age, JonBenét was part of the child beauty pageant scene, as we mentioned.
And we are talking full-blown toddlers and tiaras pageants.
Although in the recent documentary that came out, Patsy does say, she's like, oh, it really wasn't that serious. Like, it wasn't that cutthroat. But others disagreed, very much so. So by the age of 6, JonBenét had achieved titles such as Little Miss Colorado, Little Miss Charlevoix, Colorado State All-Star Kids Cover Girl, America's Royale Miss, and National Tiny Miss Beauty. This was a huge deal amongst those in the child pageant community.
I have to say, I hate the names of these pageants.
I don't like it either.
They just really give me the ick. On the outside, the family seemed to have it all, but that was not the case. Linda Hoffman Pugh, who was their cleaning lady at the time, stated that their marriage was incredibly strained and that John would berate Patsy for not living up to his expectations as a housewife.
She also claimed that Patsy had what she called a dark side.
And her name is going to come up later.
When it comes to the murder, let's go over the timeline here because there are a lot of little details that are going to come into play later in the story.
Shortly before her death, JonBenét appeared on a Little Miss Colorado float with her name on the side of it. Her father would later say that this is something he now considers to be a huge mistake.
Because it put her on display?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Around the same time, Access Graphics celebrated their big year by hosting a huge banquet that the Ramsey family attended.
On December 23rd, they hosted a large Christmas party at their home. Bill McReynolds, a former university professor, played Santa Claus.
Christmas Day was an exciting and happy time for JonBenét and Burke. During the earlier part of the day, they opened presents and the family spent time together. Afterwards, they went to a party at a family friend's house.
Nothing stood out at the party to those there. That evening, John carried a sleeping JonBenét to her bedroom and Patsy tucked her in.
The family had big plans for the following day. A private plane was waiting to take them to Michigan to see John's other children. They had all plans to go on a Disney cruise.
So again, you're talking private plane, giant house,
Disney cruise. I mean, a Disney cruise isn't that far out of it, but
university professor being Santa Claus, like it's high profile.
Affluent people, for sure.
Yes, very much so. A neighbor named Melanie Stanton would later report hearing a child scream at 2 a.m. that night. She described this as a prolonged scream belonging to a little girl that was cut off abruptly. She then went back to sleep.
Oh, man. That we've talked about times like this before where people have maybe heard something or seen something unusual and kind of thought nothing of it or thought it was something else entirely. And then to know after that it could have been something very awful.
Yeah.
John and Patsy were the first to wake up that morning around 5 a.m. John was upstairs when he heard Patsy screaming. She told him JonBenét was missing and the following letter was left behind.
We are going to read you the letter and then break it down.
Okay.
Take it away, Charlotte.
Listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. We do respect your business, but not the country that it serves. At this time, we have your daughter in our possession. She is safe and unharmed. And if you want her to see 1997, you must follow our instructions to the letter. You will withdraw $118,000 from your account. $100,000 will be in $100 bills, and the remaining $18,000 in $20 bills. Make sure that you bring an adequate size attaché to the bank. When you get home, you will put the money in a brown paper bag. I will call you between 8 and 10 a.m. tomorrow to instruct you on delivery. The delivery will be exhausting, so I advise you to be rested. That seems like such an odd thing. Like, a person writing a ransom note doesn't give a shit whether you're rested or not.
We took your child, but make sure you get a good night's sleep.
Just rest up, rest easy. If we monitor you getting the money early, we might call you early to arrange an earlier delivery of the money and hence an earlier delivery pickup of your daughter. Any deviation from my instructions will result in the immediate execution of your daughter. You will also be denied her remains for proper burial. The two gentlemen watching over your daughter do not particularly like you, so I advise you not to provoke them. Speaking to anyone about your situation, such as police, FBI, etc., will result in your daughter being beheaded. If we catch you talking to a stray dog, she dies. If you alert bank authorities, she dies. If the money is in any way marked or tampered with, she dies. You will be scanned for electronic devices, and if any are found, she dies. You can try to deceive us, but be warned that we are familiar with law enforcement countermeasures and tactics. You stand a 99% chance of killing your daughter if you try to outsmart us. Follow our instructions, and you stand a 100% chance of getting her back. You and your family are under constant scrutiny, as well as the authorities. Don't try to grow a brain, John. You are not the only fat cat around, so don't think that killing will be difficult. Don't underestimate us, John. Use that good Southern common sense of yours. It is up to you now, John. Victory, SBTC.
It is the weirdest letter.
It's very all over the place. And from what I understand, most ransom letters, not long. They're pretty like to the point about it.
Yeah, and there's a lot here that you can take away from this we're going to discuss, but one of them is that John wasn't from the South.
No.
Patsy was, but
She
he wasn't.
Yeah.
So first of all, you're probably thinking, like Charlotte said, wow, that is a long letter. And you're absolutely right, because the average ransom letter is short. It's usually around like 10 words or more, like somewhere around there. It's very, very short. This is actually one of the longest ransom letters in American criminal history.
Crazy. So it's definitely an outlier, an anomaly in that matter. It was also written in Sharpie on Patsy's notepad, which points to the fact that it was most likely written in the home.
Many large words were also misspelled. However, it's possible that this was done to throw off investigators.
Also, you guys are probably wondering about this, but the amount of $118,000 is strange. It would later be revealed that this was the exact amount that John had received as a Christmas bonus. Most, again, same thing with like the length of the ransom note. Most of the time, if someone is bothering to go to the trouble to kidnap you for ransom, they're gonna ask for more than $100,000. You're talking 500,000, $1 million, 5 million even, right?
And he had that money.
And he had it. Like we talked about, they were an affluent family. So the fact that they're asking for A, a very specific amount, and B, that it turns out that that was his Christmas bonus amount, pretty sus.
It's strange for a lot of things, but the term like you're not the only fat cat around, if you talk to a stray dog, like those kind of phrases, it's almost like someone watched a movie and then wrote a letter based on like what they've seen in movies.
Well, and same thing with like in the beginning, it's like we are from a foreign faction.
Yes.
But then bring up very specific personal details.
Yes.
A foreign faction, again, isn't going to give a hoot about your personal details. You're a means to an end, whether they want attention or money or whatever it is, right? They don't care. And again, just very long, gave too much kudos to John. Just weird all over the place.
And the thing about the whole foreign faction thing is at that point, one would wonder, like, it almost sounds like terrorism.
Yes, exactly. But then there was nothing else particularly terroristic. There's no demands apart from the money, right? If you're going to be a terrorist, you want to spread terror.
Yes.
Attacking one family isn't really going to achieve that, right? Like there's a reason why big buildings are often the targets for terrorist attacks, you know, things like that, right? Where a lot of people are scared and, you know, this just doesn't make sense.
This whole case doesn't make sense.
No, it
and
doesn't.
I mean, it's one where the longer you look into it, I'm sure you felt the same way.
Yes.
The more you know, the less you know.
100%, especially when you are listening to John give his account of the story.
Yes.
If you've seen the tapes of Patsy also doing the same thing, because unfortunately she's not with us anymore. And you really feel for them because what they went through was horrific.
Yeah.
And we'll get into it too with the police and the media, of course, and all that stuff. But then you start to hear things from other people and you're like, okay, wait a second. What if though?
Yeah. Approximately 10 minutes after the letter was found, Patsy made the following call to the police.
911 emergency. Police. What's going on? 515th Street. What's going on there, ma'am? We were kidnapping. Hurry, please. Explain to me what's going on, okay? There's a note left in our daughter's gone. A note was left in your daughter's gone? How old is your daughter? 6 years old. She's gone. 6 years old. How long ago was it? I don't know. I just found the note. My daughter's Does it say who took her? What? Does it say who took her? I don't know. There's a ransom note here. It's a ransom note? It says FBTC. Victory. Please. Okay, what's your name? Are you Patsy Ramsey? I'm the mother. Oh my God. Please. Okay, I'm sending it up to film, okay? Do you know how long she's been gone? No, I don't. Please, we just got out. Is she on here? Oh my God, please. Okay, talk to somebody. I am, honey. Please. Take a deep breath. Please, okay. Hurry. Patsy. Patsy.
A very frantic phone call.
It
I mean,
is.
it's to be expected of a 911 call when you think your daughter's been kidnapped or whatnot.
So I wanted to get the audio of that, and I was trying to find like the best quality one.
Mm-hmm.
And then I stumbled upon a whole rabbit hole.
Oh.
Okay, so there is audio from after what we just heard.
Yes, I've heard this, how she sort of thinks she's hung up, but hasn't really.
And there's a lot of theories about what she says during this time.
Mm-hmm.
And I listened to like the enhanced audio and all of that. I don't hear anything that people say that they're hearing, but they say she says like, Jesus, please, and that kind of thing. There are people who claim that they hear a male voice. They claim that they hear Burke. Like there's a lot of things that they say that they're hearing here that personally, I didn't even hear anything remotely close to that, but there's a lot of theories regarding it. You can find them online, listen for yourselves, let me know what you think, but it's just this whole case is a rabbit hole.
Mm-hmm. And the audio, I have heard it, and it's kind of one of those things where when you listen to it and someone has like put words over top as to what they think she might be saying, you're like, oh, maybe. But then if you listen to it without any other context, it's very difficult to understand. And also not particularly sounds that to me are a red flag.
No.
You might have heard a man's voice because John's standing right there. You might have heard Burke because guess what? It's his house.
Yeah.
Like not out of the question.
Well, the people who say that they heard Burke, the whole problem with that is that
he's supposed to still be asleep.
Exactly. So that's, and that's the people who think Burke was involved, but we'll get into that later.
Soon after all of this happened, the Ramseys called their close friends Fleet and Priscilla White, along with John and Barbara Fernie. Police arrived at 6 a.m., followed by the Fernies and the Whites.
They're rich because they have friends named Fleet and Priscilla.
They do. They sound like the villains in a Disney movie. You know what I mean?
The police allowed their friends to enter the home before the scene was secured in any way.
We often discuss how police handle certain cases, and sometimes everything goes well, and other times it can only be described as a series of unfortunate choices. In this case, unfortunately, we will see a great example of the latter.
This is a pretty bad one.
So one of the main issues was that the majority of the Boulder police force was on Christmas vacation. Those working the case were new to the force.
Also, murder just wasn't something that happened in Boulder. So the police had very little experience dealing with something this severe.
They even mentioned that JonBenét's murder was likely the first of the year for Boulder.
Yes.
And there were literally only 5 days left in the year. The police searched the house, but didn't look through the basement, which tragically is exactly where JonBenét would later be found. During all of this, Patsy and John waited for a phone call from the kidnappers, a call that would never come.
People who were there reported that during this time, John and Patsy did not interact with each other whatsoever.
That's very unusual. People are unique things, and each situation is unique, and you never truly know how you're going to behave in a situation until you are in that situation. Yeah. Sometimes when something horrific has happened, we deal with it in many different ways. Some people shut down, some people wail and get hysterical, some people, try to clean their house to block their minds from it or whatever. So there is a lot of suspicion around their behavior, but at the same time, it doesn't necessarily mean anything.
No, I'm a big believer in that. You cannot judge someone by how they react under great stress, because that is your brain going into just animal mode.
100%.
You cannot think clearly. You are just surviving second to second at that point. Your brain is trying its best to protect you.
Plus, if we go off of the fact that, people had mentioned that maybe John and Patsy's marriage wasn't quite as butterflies and rainbows as they maybe made it seem, maybe they were mad at each other. I mean, they might be blaming each other. Like, well, why didn't you know where she was, right? So, sometimes in a situation like this, when there is the unknown, you look for someone to blame. And maybe they were blaming each other,
And that's normal.
Absolutely.
It's terrible, but it's not completely abnormal at all. Within about an hour and a half, John had secured the $118,000 for the ransom. It took him no time to get this money.
No, he snapped his fingers and it happened. At 8 a.m., a victims advocacy group was called by the police to counsel the parents.
While this seems like a good idea, the reality of it is that just meant that more people would be walking through the crime scene. Not only that, they used the kitchen and cleaned it up afterwards, destroying any potential DNA left by the quote-unquote kidnappers.
It wasn't until 10 a.m. that JonBenét's room was finally sealed.
Speaking of 10 a.m., the letter stated that the kidnappers would call by then. When the call never came, no one really questioned it.
See, I've heard that too, is that people have said like any other parent would be staring at the clock, watching it count down second by second. But they said that John and Patsy almost didn't notice that 10 a.m. had come and gone.
And throughout this time, various law enforcement officials and friends of the family were in and out of the house.
Close to 1 p.m., Linda Arndt was the only police officer remaining on the scene. She saw that John was tense, and in an effort to give him something to do, she told him to search the house.
Which is a bizarre choice.
And police officers close to the case have even said, you never let a civilian search a crime scene without someone else present from law enforcement.
And the thing is, again, these are rookies. She was a rookie.
Yeah.
These are not seasoned detectives that are used to homicide. These are people who, they deal with like traffic violations and things like that. They don't deal with child kidnapping.
And as well, they still think they're dealing with a kidnapping.
Yes.
Yes, it is still a crime scene, but they do not realize that it is the scene of a murder at this time.
As we know in cases like this, the culprit is most often someone who is known to the child. John and Patsy had not been cleared at this time, and having him search the home is incredibly inappropriate for a number of reasons.
Absolutely. He could be staging things himself, right?
Yep.
Like, that is the big concern. John did decide to search the house from the bottom and work his way up, so immediately went to search the basement. John opened up the cellar door and screamed the words, "Oh my God, my baby."
Something that comes up with him searching the house is Linda told him, I want you to search the house from top to bottom. And he started in the basement.
And he did the opposite.
Yeah, which maybe his brain's just not working properly and he's in distress, but that is something that a lot of people think about and say, well, that's an odd choice.
But in John's own words as well, he said, well, no, the logical choice for me was to work my way from the bottom to the top. So again, a pink flag, but maybe not a red flag.
Yes, exactly. JonBenét's body was found with black duct tape around her mouth. Her wrists were tied with rope, and that same rope had been used around her neck where a garrote had been fashioned from a broken paintbrush that belonged to Patsy's art kit. She was covered with a blanket.
John walked over to her, removed the tape from her mouth, and carried her body upstairs. Her body was put in the living room by Linda Arndt.
So everyone is now compromising anything that could be left on her body.
Again, this is another thing that people bring up, that John desecrated a crime scene, essentially, right? Which he did. There's, no two ways about it. But in that moment, as a father,
yes,
any good dad out there, you wouldn't be able to stop him from getting to his child. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So again, you can argue it one way, but you can definitely argue it the other.
The crime scene was officially secured at around 2 p.m. that afternoon.
Considering that they realized JonBenét was not in her bed sometime just after 5 a.m., that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Absolutely ridiculous. An analysis was done on the ransom letter. It was an 85% match to Patsy's writing, and there are many people who believe she was the one who wrote it. Others say that whoever wrote the letter could have attempted to forge her writing. It was on her notebook after all.
Yep. It's so strange. And you can see the comparisons between the writing.
Yes, you sure can.
And you don't have to be an expert to see it and say, ooh, that's pretty similar.
But then handwriting analysis has also been very much brought into question in a lot of cases too. So again, it's one of those things where you can argue for it, but you can also argue against it.
Many have also pointed out that it was strange that the letter was addressed to only John, especially after another page was found where someone had written Mr. and Mrs. I. The theory is that they began to write Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey and stopped before they finished the letter R and then only addressed it to John.
Yeah, and they kind of found the scrap of this particular piece kind of still stuck in there when they kind of gave it a flip through.
Yeah.
So it looked for sure like someone had began to write and then ripped it away. The question also was, why would there even be a ransom note when JonBenét had been in the house the whole time and likely already dead?
Yeah, especially considering the scream was at 2 a.m.
Exactly. So by that account, she had been for sure kidnapped long before they even realized she wasn't in her bed anymore.
And that points to the possibility that the crime scene was staged.
At 9 p.m. that evening, deputy coroners brought out her body. There had been no communication between law enforcement and the press until that point. An investigator came out and told them who the body belonged to, and thus a media frenzy ensued.
An autopsy was performed, and it was concluded that the cause of death was strangulation and or skull fracture. The theory was that she had been subdued in her bed and then moved to the basement. She likely woke up during the process of being strangled, screamed, and was hit in the head.
And I want to just clarify, it wasn't just a bonk on the head.
Yeah.
Whoever hit her caved her skull in. It left an 8-inch crack in her skull. This was not a light bonk. Someone really did a number on her.
And not to get too gory here, but the garrote and the rope around her neck, John would later say it was embedded so tightly that he didn't even notice it.
No, he saw that her hands were tied. He saw that the duct tape was on her mouth, but did not realize that there was anything embedded in her neck until he had fully brought her upstairs and everything. That is a brutal thing to do to a 6-year-old. My God. This all puts the likely time of death at around 2 a.m. when that scream was heard by the neighbor.
It did not appear that there was clear sexual trauma to her body, but there was a small amount of blood found near her privates. It is possible that she was assaulted with the paintbrush.
The type of trauma that was found could have possibly happened in some other way. The report also stated that the area had been wiped with a cloth.
Pineapple was found in her system. Now, this might seem like a small detail, but this has been a huge cause for debate and theories. Photographs of the home that were taken that day show a bowl of pineapple that was in the kitchen with a spoon in it. However, neither John nor Patsy remember putting it there, despite the fact that Patsy's fingerprints were on it.
Patsy was also medicated.
And
it's Christmas Day.
It's her kitchen. She's going to touch a bowl in her kitchen.
And who's to say that she hadn't touched the bowl before the pineapple was put in the first place? Do you know what I mean? She maybe put fingerprints on it when she put it away.
Yeah. The whole pineapple theory is another thing where this is a classic corkboard with red strings story.
100%. Blood was found on JonBenét's underwear that did not belong to her. When tested, they saw that it belonged to a male. The DNA did not match anyone from the family. It was run through a database containing more than 1.5 million samples, but unfortunately, there were no matches.
As for the press, in the beginning, they almost exclusively focused on John, Patsy, and even Burke when it came to suspects.
And they were relentless. After all, this wasn't just the murder of any child. This was the murder of a child where they had countless photos and videos of her performing, dressed more or less like an adult woman.
One news anchor even dared, and this pisses me off.
Dude, I know what you're going to say, and this is so incredibly offensive. Even in those days, I do not know how she said this on TV.
I don't know how she kept her job.
I agree.
She called her a tarted up miniature dwarf hooker. This is a 6-year-old. A dead 6-year-old.
Let's just sit with that for a moment, shall we?
I would call it shocking, but that doesn't seem like a strong enough word.
I'm just like, you heartless cow of a woman.
Yeah.
How do you say a murdered 6-year-old? And I don't give a shit what you think about child beauty pageants.
No.
Have some decorum, for the love of God. You are on national television saying this about a child.
I hope she regrets that. I truly hope she still feels the weight of those words, because that is unforgivable.
100%.
Many also stated that she looked, and I quote, sexy way beyond her years.
When the recent documentary came out, my friend Emily, who also is a big true crime fan, she came up to me and she's like, have you seen it? And I was like, no, not yet. She's like, watch it because we need to discuss. And she's like, I'm just going to say something right now. There's a particular video that is shown where JonBenét, I believe she's doing a little performance for a group of like senior citizens or something. And it's a Christmas song, I believe. And at one point she goes over, picks up a little saxophone.
Oh my God.
And she's dancing with it. Just like you've seen any saxophone player do so.
Yeah.
And the way these reporters and news anchors are talking about her, they're like, look how sexual she's being. Like, she's practically, actually, she's on a show with a so-called expert. And this woman's like, you can see her masturbating with it.
I know.
That is not, she's a child, for God's sakes. And then she's like, you can tell that she's like a sexually aware child.
Yes.
My God, woman. Again, I hope you're freaking ashamed of yourself.
So much about how this was reported is just so hugely inappropriate.
Again, I don't necessarily agree with child beauty pageants. I don't have children, but I wouldn't be signing my children up to them. But that's my personal preference. But there was not, like, what they were saying about it was absolutely ludicrous.
It's not what they made it out to. I mean, I don't agree with it, but it's not what they made it out to be by any means.
And John and Patsy were judged very harshly due to JonBenét's participation in these pageants. Patsy did defend it by saying,
that was a sick mind looking from that vantage point. It was not happening that way.
She continued to defend their choices, describing the pageants as a way for young girls to express themselves and perform.
The press also vilified the police when it came to how the case was handled. Linda Arndt would later say that she fully believed John Ramsey had killed his daughter. She claimed that he acted cold that day.
On December 31st, John got a call from one of his employees. They told him,
I was told by someone inside the system to get this message to you. They believe you killed your daughter and you need to get the best defense attorney you can get your hands on.
John did as such and refused to speak with the press or police unless it was through the lawyer, which rubbed many people the wrong way.
Something I've thought a lot about is them being as wealthy as they are and as high profile as they are not going to handle something like this like a regular person would.
No, absolutely not. They have the means and the financial funds to deal with it like a celebrity would.
Yes, very much so.
Hiring a PR firm, lawyering up, all this stuff. Again, lawyering up can make someone seem very suspicious, very guilty, but any lawyer will tell you, lawyer up whether you are guilty or not, because
it's the right thing to do.
Exactly. The police, 90% of the time, do not have your best interests at heart when you are a suspect in a case like this.
Soon after, friends urged the Ramseys to speak to the press, so they did an interview with CNN. Unfortunately, this really did not help their case.
No, because people were like, well, why are you talking to CNN but not the police?
Yes.
During this particular interview, Patsy appeared to be heavily medicated and was slurring her words. She was very emotional and begged for anyone with information to come forward. She said that there was a murderer on the loose and that parents should hold their babies close to them.
The mayor of Boulder said there was nothing to worry about. This led many people to believe that she had been told who the murderer was, and that if the mayor said there wasn't someone on the loose, that it could possibly be someone known to the family.
So I think the mayor was trying to kind of mitigate the situation to be like, because Patsy had kind of made it seem like, my God, there's a rabid murderer on the loose, like, hide your kids, hide your wife kind of thing. And the mayor was like, no, that's not quite true. Simmer down.
Not in Boulder.
But then people made some other assumptions. The family had also hired that PR team, which struck many as a strange thing to do.
And then the mock trial happened.
This is also freaking disgusting, you guys.
This shocked me.
I hadn't seen or heard of it before. And I was watching it and I was just like, again, this would not fly today. How they did not get sued from here to hell and back, I will never know.
No. Geraldo Rivera aired a mock trial on his show where he implied that JonBenét had been sexually abused because of the pageant tapes. His quote-unquote jury found the parents guilty.
It was like they had an quote-unquote jury. It was like 6 people, 6 random people from probably the audience or something. And they're just sitting up on the stage, kind of very much like Jerry Springer or Maury or anything like that, as you can imagine. And they just basically rip John and Patsy Ramsey to pieces on baseless bullshit. And then in the end, they're like, yeah, they did it.
I was curious about the aftermath of this. And in recent years, John and Geraldo appeared on TV.
Whoa.
It was like a Skype call kind of thing. So they're not together, but they're in part of the same conversation. Yes. And it's interesting because the caption for all of the videos is like, Geraldo Rivera apologizes for mock interview, blah, blah, blah. He doesn't. He really doesn't. He says, you know, I'm so sorry for what happened to you. I'm sorry for everything that you've been through. I'm sorry for the loss of your wife. God. He doesn't say, I regret this.
For crucifying you on public television.
Yeah.
And this is like within days of the murder.
This happened quickly.
Yeah, this isn't like months or weeks after. This is within, I think, a 5-day period or something.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
And I honestly find this mock trial if you're curious and watch it because
it's probably on YouTube. I'm sure it is.
Bits and pieces are.
Yeah.
I can't even begin to describe how inappropriate this was. And I mean, like, daytime TV in the 90s was a whole other thing.
100%.
You know, you had like serial killers on, you know, Maury and things. You know what I mean? Like, not quite, but you know what I mean. And it's just so offensive is the best word I can come up with.
I want to know in that writer's room, whatever you can call it for a show like that, how someone was like, what if? And everyone was like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Did not one person be like, hey, guys, maybe not?
No, they did it for the ratings. That's all they cared about.
You know what? They probably got away with it because there were probably words sprinkled around the particular airing of that episode, like allegedly. And this is all for entertainment purposes. So then you get away with it.
Yeah.
Like we said earlier, when it comes to this case, there is a very long list of potential suspects. Someone has even come forward saying he was the one who murdered JonBenét.
One of the potential suspects, we'll get to this next week, is Burke, who was 10.
Yes.
Have you seen him on Dr. Phil?
I think I've seen snippets, but not like the whole thing.
I remember watching that when it aired.
Wow.
And I think it was a 2-part series. And so he did the first one. And the second one starts with Dr. Phil being like, okay, I know this looks bad.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he's like, I understand he is not coming across the way that he should right now. But he basically says, like, this is someone who is emotionally not able to
convey or express.
Because when you watch it, he's talking about his little sister being murdered with a huge smile on his face. And it's a nervous smile. You know, you can see what it is what I would call a nervous smile.
Yeah.
You know, you're talking about something uncomfortable. You're talking about something that has been a shadow over you for essentially your whole life. But that interview does not help things. No. I don't think he ever should have gone on that show. But it also says that a lot of daytime TV, you know, we're not quite at the mock trial thing anymore, but it's still pretty bad.
Well, we've all seen Dr. Phil. We all know what that's like. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
It's great for entertainment. Not so great in most other ways.
No.
Problematic. Next week, we will be going over the suspects as well as going over information that has come to light in more recent years.
And there has been some new information. I thought that the documentary was very well done.
I enjoyed it a lot, actually. I enjoyed that we're actually getting the words from a lot of people. I felt very similar about Making Manson, in the sense that we're getting all these perspectives from the people that were there at the time, the police officers, the reporters, the lawyers, and as well as John Ramsey. Like I said, Patsy's unfortunately passed away, but I use the words from the horse's mouth a lot, but that's really what we're getting here. You start hearing from John and Patsy, and you're like, okay, this is making sense. And then they flip it from the other point of view, and you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
It's a very polarizing case.
And I mean, John is up in his years now, you know, and it's so tragic because if you subscribe to the theory that it was not them and that they don't know what happened, Patsy died not knowing who killed her daughter. And John does not want that to happen to him. So and he has the resources. He has the money
and the time.
Yes, exactly.
Except for the fact that he is getting older, but you know, he's retired. He's privileged in the sense that he's not like a single mom trying to work to make this work, because those cases tend to get lost just because of, you know, the lack of resources or whatever. Fortunately for John, he does have those resources. So he's very lucky in that sense. I mean, we're not quite to the end yet, but it is still officially unsolved. I hope it is one of these cases where we do get an answer. I would like to see an answer. I think a lot of people would at this point.
Yeah. And you know what? It's interesting to me because I read an article that was written by someone who talked about how different this case would have been if this was a poor family.
Absolutely. It would have been different.
And a lot of those people say that if that was the case, the parents would be in jail.
Absolutely.
Because they would not have had the resources to hire a defense lawyer, do all these things. It would have gone a very different direction, whether or not they were guilty.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Holy cow.
Yeah, because I mean, the thing is, these people, they weren't just like well off. They were rich.
John's company became a $1 billion company very fast.
Yes.
We're talking within like a 5-year period or something, from him starting it to him selling it, and, you know, it being a powerhouse of a corporation.
And I mean, this whole thing did terrible things for his career. He attempted,
obviously.
Yeah, he attempted to work for government. He tried to run for office. That did not go well.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
So, I mean, financially, this has not been good for him, but he still has those resources.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. There's a lot here.
I'm going to be thinking about it long after we've recorded, I'm sure.
This was supposed to be just like a 1 episode thing, but the more that we look into it, the more information that comes out, and especially regarding the suspects, because there are so many different suspects. You read about one suspect and you're like, I get it.
That's very compelling.
And then you get to the next one, you're like, oh, wait. That's also compelling.
It's similar in cases we've talked about in the past where there'll be people who made up their mind back then and will never change their mind. Kind of like with the Menendez brothers, right?
Yes.
There are people are going to see new facts that have come to light and be like, wow, that's a twist I wasn't expecting. And maybe there are some people that'll never truly make their mind up unless we officially solve it.
And then there's the people out there who think JonBenét Ramsey is Katy Perry.
That is a theory. I forgot about that one.
I can't forget about that one because, oh my God.
Oh, well, we'll leave it at that for today.
So much to say.
So much.
All right, it's that time of the episode. We're going to talk about Patreon. If you want to watch our videos, you can do that on Patreon. Early episode reveals are available to all tiers, including the free ones. There's also a free trial if you want to just kind of check it out and see if you like it. But we do want to thank our Grim VIPs for their support. Thank you to
Steven Centauri, Paranoid Pop Rocks, Mayhem Mudkip, Lisa, Nova, Judy, Carrie, Bob, and Atlantean Jedi.
Thanks.
Thank you. Y'all are the bee's knees.
Thank you all so much for listening. This has been
The Grim Curriculum. Did you know adding data to a USB stick actually makes it lighter, not heavier?
I'm baffled.
It's something to do with like binary ones and zeros.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's too much for my brain. But yeah, lighter, not heavier.
Interesting.
Bye.